right. First of all, thank you very much, Tim, for this kind introduction. Thank you, Gerald and Steve as well for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity of sharing my current research with the William and Mary community. So this project that I'm working on, it's part of our larger project, which is Inter-American Connections. It's pretty much trying to understand the significance of networks connecting North and South America to the development of global trade, and specifically for the state formation in the United States and the process of independence in South America. So today I would like to focus specifically on how United States traders appeared in South America, and how these connections were critical for the development of American economy in the early republic, and also for the in the last moments of Spanish colonialism, how these Americans allowed for South Americans from Rio de la Plata, the region of Argentina and Uruguay today, to establish new economic ties to Europe or North America, or even places in Asia, while they were still part of the Spanish Empire. So this project here was not just my doing. I coordinated, but I had the help of many students here at William and Mary, and most recently, Sigi Macias, one of our students in history and the joint degree program, St. Andrews, was a key person in helping me identify some of these sources and entering this in a larger database that contains more than 3,000 records of voyages connecting Rio de la Plata to the United States, Brazil, Africa, and in other parts of South America. Well, now I'll start here. I'll talk about oceanic borderlands and contraband and silver, or how early trade networks to South America jump-started the US national economy. So all right. In May of 1802, 44 ships flying the United States flag were detained by Spanish authorities in the main ports of Rio de la Plata, the principal hub of Spanish commerce in the South Atlantic. The stranded United States ships were sailing from Europe and North American ports to and from Brazil and to Cuba or Asian ports. A couple of vessels that brought slaves from Africa to Rio de la Plata were also grounded. This episode reverberated throughout the Atlantic, from Rio de Janeiro to London, to Hamburg, Philadelphia, and Providence, Rhode Island. United States merchants estimated that local authorities confiscated more than $3 million in cargo. In the pages of the Philadelphia Gazette, a gentleman from respectively at Buenos Aires demanded that the US government intervention in favor of American traders. A merchant from Philadelphia even requested of President Thomas Jefferson to send a state ship to liberate these stranded vessels. Although no official United States ship was sent to Rio de la Plata and no armed conflict derived from this episode, the 1802 stranded vessels incident sheds light on North American commercial participation in Spanish South American markets in the last decade of Spanish colonial rule. Between 1798 and 1807, no less than 167 United States vessels entered the Rio de la Plata ports carrying manufactured goods, produce, alcohol, and enslaved Africans. During this period, North American vessels comprised the second largest foreign merchant fleet in the estuary and transported more than 8,000 enslaved Africans to Rio de la Plata ports. The presence of US vessels was so noticeable in Buenos Aires that, according to a Spanish officer in Buenos Aires, Merchants were addicted to these new terms of engagement with foreigners, and many millions of pesos in silver were being exported to the United States, generating a shortage of currency in Buenos Aires. Furthermore, there was a large number of foreigners that one could find on the streets of Buenos Aires and Montevideo, that attesting to the prevalence of this type of clandestine trade. Well, as the Napoleonic Wars ravaged Europe and in the Atlantic, neutral United States vessels carried produce, silver, information, and people from Rio de la Plata to other Spanish American ports, including Cuba, or even to the Iberian Peninsula. In this context of war derived from the French Revolution, American neutral vessels were critical in keeping the economies of South America alive. So North American traders provided a new avenue for Rio de la Plata merchants to acquire European manufactures from London, Amsterdam, and other northern European ports. During this period, North American traders transported thousands of captives from Africa to Rio de la Plata, and actually they became the principal slave suppliers to Spanish South Atlantic in the years of 1805 and 1806, surpassing the Brazilian traffickers that were hegemonic in that area. So for North Americans, Rio de la Plata offered vast markets for European, Asian, and other Atlantic goods. And even more importantly, Rio de la Plata offered access to silver and gold in a critical time for the growing trade in the Pacific and in the Indian Ocean, and to the nascent North American banking system. So in order to build banks in this time period, silver was critical. In the United States, there were no silver mines yet. Therefore, all the silver circulating in Anglo-North America derived from Spanish possessions, either being Mexico or now this new avenue that I'll be talking about, it was coming from the silver from Potosi, currently Bolivia, that flew through Buenos Aires, and then Buenos Aires then became this port in the middle of the river of silver, right? So a big source of silver, critical for the development of the American economy, industrialization, banking system. So this is the time that there is the land mania. So if you look west, there's a lot of speculation in land, but people looking towards the global markets, this is the moment in which the United States creates its own network of global trade, entering in China and India, competing with the British. In this process, South America, Rio de la Plata was critical. And as you can see here, it became so common that these lists of prices current. So instead of like merchants and agents just sending notes on the prices there to inform North Americans, you see that they're already printing these forms. But even more important here, it is becoming so integrated in this complicated economy that we will see that the trade is not just in goods. We'll see also that Americans are selling in Rio de la Plata or in Spanish South America, bills of exchange, letters of credit over London. So literally, Americans will start selling paper, credit in to Spanish subjects that then could access credit over London. Literally is the financialization of the early global market. So economic historians of the United States have emphasized the critical role that Spanish silver had in the development of the American economy in the early republic. Normally, though, they talk about how Americans were tapping silver from Mexico via Cuba. Very little attention is spent in the American presence in Rio de la Plata or in the South Atlantic. The ones who acknowledge the importance of the South Atlantic, the historians who acknowledge the significance of stopping in Rio de la Plata or even Chile, normally say that it's just a stopping point on the way to the trade with China, the famous China trade. And they just portrayed as a simple stopping point in which Americans would try to pick up silver. Well, examining the itineraries and the specific cases here would give us a slight different view. Number one, it's not just picking up silver. It's actually picking up silver to pay off debts in China, correct, but also selling European goods to the Spanish-American markets, therefore enabling the United States re-exporting economy by acquiring goods in Amsterdam, London, Hamburg, and selling it in Rio de la Plata. Often, this silver would not return, it will not go to China. Rather, it will come back to the United States. And it's not by chance that during this period, we're going to have the creation of several banks in New England and even in Philadelphia, all related to these new routes that were established in Rio de la Plata. So the South American trade, it is important for the expansion of the American global trade, for the expansion and growth of the American trade with Europe, and also to the development of the American banking system, the accumulation of capital that also would result in the early industrial revolution in New England. And in order to give some example and show that this is a human process, right? It's a macro process, but we can find it at a micro level, at the individual level. So I will zoom in one individual that was an agent for a very important American commercial firm, Brown and Ives from Providence, Rhode Island. If you ever heard of the Brown University, that's exactly that family that I am referring to. One of their captains was called Ebenezer Corey, and also from Providence. Corey went to South America a couple of times for the Brown and Ives. Today, I would illustrate the strategies, these commercial strategies, by zooming in his stories in the South Atlantic. So it was in the 1800s, the year of 1800, when Brown and Ives, after hearing about the great profits possible in the trade of silver in South America, decided to organize a voyage of speculation to Rio de la Plata. So because the Spanish Empire did not allow trade with neutrals, especially the Spanish Empire did not allow the exportation of silver, this voyage involved contraband, involved necessarily some methods and techniques to bypass the Spanish rule. Therefore, Brown and Ives from Providence sent their agent, Thomas Halsey, as a supercargo or the commercial agent for two ships, the frigate Marianne, a big ship that would carry all the cargo, and a schooner, the Eliza, that was a fast-sailing ship that was supposed to head to South America to arrive there before the Marianne and prepare the terrain for make the arrangements for the disembarkation of this cargo, connecting, bribing local authorities, and so forth. The Marianne left Rhode Island towards Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, the Marianne had its loaded Ginevra and also some German textiles. After that, the Marianne stopped over in London, where it completed its cargo of British manufactures. So the schooner Eliza had arrived in Rio de la Plata. And by that moment, they had just a small cargo. But just to be admitted, the schooner had paid already the value of 33% of their cargo in bribes to enter the Spanish Empire. The schooner was supposed to meet the Marianne in Rio de Janeiro. They were supposed to arrange things, go back to Rio. They all would meet there. The cargo was supposed to be, from the Marianne, was supposed to be divided, but into the schooner. And then they would head together to the Rio de la Plata. There, in the Rio de la Plata, the Marianne was supposed to stop in front of the port and put a blue flag with a yellow cross on its top gallant mast. That was the sign for the authorities that had been bribed to allow for the ship to get in. The big problem: the Eliza never made to Rio de Janeiro because the Spanish authorities did not let it go. Therefore, the Marianne entered Rio de la Plata by itself. And the captain, not being able to communicate with the supercargo, decided to figure out by himself, make arrangements with local merchants to disembark the cargo. In this story, the captain was a man named Daniel Oni, but the first mate, the second ranking officer, was our man Ebenezer Corey. During the night, when more than 500 boxes with merchandise, and these are fairly huge wooden boxes, were being disembarked from the Marianne, authorities struck and confiscated all the goods. All the crew was arrested, including the captain. So more than $80,000 worth in merchandise then were confiscated. This started a huge process, so huge that this cargo would become a point of contention that Brown and Ives would even bring into the high diplomatic levels. In 1818, during the negotiations of the Adam-Moniz Treaty, the Brown and Ives tried to get reimbursement for this lost cargo. But so it became a big deal. It seems that they claim to have lost all the money in that voyage. Well, they lost for some time all the money involved in the cargo. But along the cargo, Ebenezer Corey was in charge of selling $200,000 worth in bills of exchange over London. So, and he was selling it at 25% premium in payment over 6 months. So even in this story here, in which the contraband trade did not go well, Brown and Ives were still able to profit more than $40,000 just in selling letters of credit over London banks to local Spanish merchants that were able to acquire the credit over markets that they were not permitted according to Spanish law. So that is the Marianne eventually was freed to go in 1803. The captain was still arrested, but then first mate Ebenezer Corey was promoted to captain, and Ebenezer Corey, now captain, left Rio de la Plata with the Marianne and took the Marianne to London, where right above, when they're almost getting there, actually, the Marianne was approached by a British cruiser and taken as a prize. So even though this is a sad story, not as sad as the one that I'm about to tell, but it's a very sad story, the merchants involved in it made a handsome profit. Even when things went bad, it was not that bad. So that is something important to keep in mind. But so the Marianne actually was the beginning of this new route, right? It's the first ship that the Brown and Ives sent to South America. In the next 3 decades, Brown and Ives sent, just this firm alone, another 29 voyages to to South American ports, including Brazil, Rio de la Plata, Chile, Peru, Ecuador. These voyages usually included many different ports of call, right? They could touch ports in Africa, in Asia, so also increasing the profitability of the trade with China, the trade with India for American merchants. So it's a critical piece in this new global trade system that United States merchants were entering. And for instance, the itineraries could vary vastly, and some of these ships would even actually touch South American ports and keep going north on the Pacific, connecting South America to the nascent economies of California. So that's something that's very important. Well, and the one of these voyages was the second voyage of Ebenezer Corey to Rio de la Plata, and that was the voyage of the brigantine Eliza, Captain Corey, who sailed from Providence to Rio de Janeiro, to Rio de la Plata, to Port Jackson in Australia, and it was supposed to reach Canton, but in China, but it shipwrecked after hitting a coral reef near the Fiji Islands. And that's the story here that I'm gonna go in detail now for us to have an idea of how intricate and globally connected this circuit was. So Ebenezer Corey, this time, did not know that when he left Providence in March of 1806, he never suspected that that was the last time that he would see his wife, Mrs. Corey, and their son, Alan. In Rio de la Plata, he was supposed to sell the Eliza's cargo, to load silver. He was supposed also to exchange some letters of credit, selling bills, and he was supposed to load nutria-skins. Nutria-skins are critical because the Chinese, that was one of the few goods that the Chinese wanted very much in addition to silver. So this was like preparing a cargo to enter in Canton market. So once when Corey was about to enter in Rio de la Plata, he was surprised by the fact that, when Corey arrived in Rio de Janeiro on his way to Rio de la Plata, he was surprised to hear that the British had blocked Rio de la Plata and they were trying to invade Buenos Aires for the second time. Yes, in 1806, the British invaded Buenos Aires trying to conquer the city in order to have a stable source of silver. However, the British failed. But before they failed, go back to Ebenezer Corey in Rio de Janeiro. He hears about that, but the Americans were very close to British commercial houses. That was not an impediment. Corey followed to Rio de la Plata. Once there, Corey was arrived and was invited to meet with the British general and that was leading the offensive. Corey people had heard that Corey knew very well the Rio de la Plata due to his previous experiences there. Therefore, Corey was impressed by the British official to actually pilot the British fleet to try to invade Buenos Aires. So Corey was forced, I don't know the levels of coercion on this, but he was forced to direct the British fleet into Buenos Aires. 3 weeks later, the British were repelled and kicked out from Buenos Aires. So Corey came back. He was very dissatisfied. He didn't get paid for this. It delayed for his trip in 3 weeks, which would put him in a very complicated situation to cross the Cape and head to Australia. But nonetheless, he went. The problem here is that Corey started facing some opposition from his crew that were not happy with staying in Rio de la Plata for that long. But Corey reported that he was able to leave Rio de la Plata with $11,000 in silver and $28,000 in bills of exchange that he had been able to sold there. So what we are seeing, so they head to Port Jackson. We don't know exactly what happened in this voyage. We know that the relationship between Ebenezer Corey and his crew when they reached Port Jackson was terrible, to a point that Corey charged some of his officials of stealing from the ship. And British authorities that put some of them in jail. Eventually, they regrouped and left Port Jackson, where they collected some bills of exchange there too, and they were heading to Canton. And that's when the fate of our Ebenezer Corey started to change to the very bad. So when they were going towards along the Fiji Islands, the Eliza hit a coral reef, and Corey and they shipwrecked. Corey was able to save at that moment he was carrying 15,000 in silver and 5,000 in letters of credit. So Corey stayed hanging for 5 days on a wooden plank from the ship. So imagine Corey with 15,000 pesos in silver hanging on a silver on a piece of wood in the middle of the beautiful Fiji Islands, until that the ship Jenny from Boston passed by and rescued him. There was just one problem there. His crew has been rescued by the same ship. And there, once the Jenny rescued Ebenezer Corey, the crew had already told them that Corey was no good man. Actually, Corey had helped the British to invade Buenos Aires. So the Jenny turned Ebenezer Corey into the Spanish authorities of the Mariana Islands, current day Guam, but back then a Spanish possession. So Corey was arrested by the Spaniards because he was charged with treason or attacking literally the Spanish Empire, and he was put on a ship to go to the Philippines, where he would be tried. Well, Corey was in really bad luck. The Spanish ship Santa Gertrudes shipwrecked on the way to the Philippines. And that was the last that we've heard from Ebenezer Corey. We know that the Spanish authorities reported $8,500 in silver found with Corey and approximately 5,000 letters of credit. So Brown and Ives eventually received these monies back, and Ebenezer Corey perished in this unfortunate voyage that was started in Providence, encompassed destinations in Europe, South America, Oceania, and India, demonstrating here the global scope of these inter-American networks. So, the strange voyage of Ebenezer Corey and the brig Eliza was an exceptional case, but it was just one of hundreds of these ships that connected North America to South America, to Asia, to Europe. In Corey's story, as well as for many United States merchants, South American ports played a decisive role in shaping global trade circuits. United States trade in South America included voyages to sell manufactured goods in markets in Rio de la Plata, Brazil, Chile, to acquire Atlantic commodities to sell in Europe, in the US, or even Cuba. And it was a very important source of silver and gold for ships going to Canton and India, for paying off debts in Europe, and for the capitalization of the nascent American banking system. Like in Corey's story, the consequences of trading in South America often reached oceans and lands beyond the Atlantic, contributing to shaping global commerce, shaping new empires and nations, and shaping and affecting human lives at the dawn of a new phase of global commerce and financial capitalism. Thank you very much.
That was outstanding, Fabricio. Very, very interesting, and has really whetted my appetite and our appetites about asking more questions. So, as I put in the chat there, please place a question in there for Fabricio, and we really appreciate it. Most interesting. I guess to get us started off, what happened to the crew of Captain Ebenezer Corey? We know what happened to him. What happened to the crew that turned on him eventually?
Well, the crew actually was rescued by the Boston ship Jenny, most of them are the survivors. And they were eventually, some of them left and picked up other, let's say, ships. Some of them left in the Mariana Islands, and they enlisted as crews in other ships that were going to trade with Mexico. But that guy, the trader, and the main officers actually proceeded to Canton, and there they contacted the American consul in Canton at that time, that was Edward Carrington, also from Providence. And from there, they were able to get into other American ships and return to the United States.
Gotcha. And another question that's come up is usually with South America, we hear about gold and Spanish doubloons. What's the significance of the silver trade you describe, and how did this matter in the United States?
Well, the silver trade was extremely important throughout the early modern period, since the 1500s up to the 1800s, because silver was the global currency. So silver was accepted as currency in Asia, in China. It was accepted as well as currency in Asia, in Africa, in South America. So in a time in which we don't have a global currency or a global banking system, silver was critical to enable long distance trade. Therefore, we are always, in previous periods, like since the Spanish Empire was the sitting, let's say, on 80% of the silver reserves of the early modern period. The other big producer was Japan. So the pieces of eight, the doubloons that the pirates of the Caribbean, right, were always looking for, they were actually important to start this global trade. It continued to be super important in the 1800s, but as we see alongside silver here, we are finding other, this is the moment in which other mechanisms of exchange starts to appear alongside silver. But it's critical, is the global currency of the period.
And the U.S. Didn't have silver resources. I know you mentioned that a little bit in your presentation.
Well, the United States did not count with a silver mine, absolutely not. Or British America did not have. This is previous also to the gold rush in California. So when you think about American dollars, we are always looking at Spanish pesos converted into American dollars. Or some of you may have heard even the Spanish peso was divided in 8 reales, right? The units, 8 units. So these, therefore, the pieces of 8 that the pirates loved. So they were all smuggled silver from the Spanish Empire. So when we hear, for instance, an old expression to refer to the American quarter, 2 bits, right? 50,
Right.
a quarter is 2 bits. Actually, 2 bits, it's 2 reales of the pieces of 8. So it was so dependent. Early American economy was so dependent on American silver that even the way that we called coins was influenced by the silver peso.
Very interesting. We've had a question from Casey on our chat line here. She says, I'm fascinated with these bills of exchange and how they functioned within the economy of Rio de la Plata. How did Spanish merchants use these bills considering the trade restrictions?
Thank you, Casey. It's so good to see you here. Congratulations. I see that you're about to give a talk too in the Mass Historical. Great. I'm looking forward to it. And this is a great question. I'm learning more about the bills of exchange as I progress. I've been surprised by that. But these bills of exchange are being able to be deployed by the Spanish subjects because this is a time of war. Therefore, neutral trade was ongoing. And Spanish merchants were able to move these bills of exchange, for instance, even within the empire, trading them with Cuban merchants. Then Cuban merchants had licenses and authorizations to trade with North American or other European colonies in the Caribbean. But also, Spanish merchants from South America were able to deploy these bills of exchange in neutral markets in Europe. And here I'm referring specifically to Hamburg. That was a big hub between the Iberian Peninsula and the Amsterdam and London. So that's how it's again within other circuits in which war was critical and neutral trade was the big enabler of these circuits.
Thanks, Case. That's a great question. I've got one question as we expect others. Kind of in the following years, as we leave off your story here, the next decade or so, these countries in South America are gaining their independence. And then the Monroe Doctrine, William and Mary alumnus, President Monroe and Secretary of State John Quincy Adams on saying, hey, rest of the world and Europe, hands off. This is the Northern and South American domain. Tell us a little bit more how that plays out and the impact on the trade that we've talked about, et cetera.
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I think super pertinent. So important thing to keep in mind is that the United States had also strong interest. I showed here that just for Rio de la Plata, 58 American slave ships brought more than 8,000 captives to Rio de la Plata, right? So this is a time in which you're still talking about the Spanish Empire. So during this period is the moment that Americans created networks of trade to areas that would be later independent. So North Americans, some of these merchants would turn into privateers for these revolutionary movements that would emerge in the 1810s. So during this period as well, so we're talking about here the routing of American connections in some of these colonies, such as Buenos Aires, Montevideo, in current-day Uruguay, Chile, right, Valparaiso, but we cannot forget Cuba. And Americans are not only trading in Cuba, they were investing heavily in plantations. So yes, the Monroe Doctrine certainly was like, leave America alone for the Americans, being all of the Americans, right? South Americans, and so forth. But also saying that leave slavery alone in Cuba, leave slavery alone in Buenos Aires or in Brazil, right? So the Monroe Doctrine is not only a matter of sovereignty and diplomacy, but we are looking at leaving these trade networks and investments that are all very dependent and related to slavery, leaving it alone. So these are, let's say, perhaps is like in the roots of the interests that would be the engine behind the Monroe Doctrine.
Well, you mentioned Rio de la Plata, and one of the ways I've gotten to know you over the years, Fabricio, is the conference that you put on at William and Mary each spring with the title of Rio de la Plata Conference. So tell us more about that and the scholars that you bring to Williamsburg and the conversations and more about that. It's really so interesting.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think that William and Mary, we have like a very strong history department, and one of the reasons that attracted me to William and Mary and that I came here and I'm very happy is that we are very strong in Atlantic history, right, Casey? And in these interconnected histories. And that's what we try to do in bringing the Rio de la Plata workshop here to William and Mary. It's an informal group of scholars that study Rio de la Plata, but is very interested in Atlantic connections. And it's a group of folks that we try to bring here to discuss pre-circulated papers. Very much like in the tradition that Yomohandro Institute, this venerable institution that we house here on campus, their colloques is like, people bring a pre-circulated paper that they want to publish, and we have a group of scholars around the table that would provide feedback in order to make this, to improve these pieces, be ready for publication. So once a year, we bring scholars that know the region, that know South America, that know the Atlantic as well. And we have 8 people presenting papers. Normally, we have between 20 and 25 scholars around the table, graduate students from William and Mary and our colleagues on campus too. And that's a way that we can bring the South Atlantic into the Atlantic world, or perhaps is a way that we can make early America very vast. Is a way of bringing vast early America, putting the vast on it. So, but the whole idea is to bring experts and to help them to produce scholarship. After 11 years of this workshop, right, the 3 first workshops were at my previous institution, and then I brought this back with me. Next year, we are supposed to have our first edited volume that will bring the new approaches to Rio de la Plata and the Atlantic world. It's going to be the very first collection in the English language that would provide this historiographical and new research overview for the region. So yeah, I'm very, very proud of that.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back to talk about it when it's published. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Steve has asked a question out. He's asked, can you talk about the U.S. economic institutions that evolved alongside these early global trade networks?
Well, I will try my best, right, to get, but this is a very pivotal moment in American economic history in the early republic. So again, I think that we have different moments, different processes going on. Like first, it is the moment that we see this speculation and a lot on land. So that is a different front. But that was seriously important when American states and the federal government started taking, pretty much grabbing or selling preemptive rights on indigenous land, therefore finding fiscal revenue over selling indigenous land. So that was one thing that led to land speculation. And many of these elites, including a guy named Robert Morrison from Philadelphia, was part of this process. But there were also folks that were involved in international trade. And international trade relied a lot on credits that were often provided by London big Baring Brothers or bank, or Thomas Dickerson big commercial houses. So, and the early republic marks when the Americans start creating their own banks. So it's very regional. It's very regional, to a point that a big merchant in Rhode Island, let's say in Bristol, Rhode Island, or Newport, would be so big and they will create a bank. So it's the first time that you are seeing here the organization of the American financial systems being like states consolidating debt and finding revenue through floating these bonds or selling titles over land, or also these organization and capitalizations of this new bank system. So it's a moment that we are seeing that we are the financial institutions are not yet defined, and the rules of the game are still not defined. It's precisely in this moment that we have the growth and structuring of this system. We have to add that it is also the moment that we will see industries appearing more, spreading throughout New England, textile mills and so forth, and the moment that we're going to have turnpikes. So there's like a series of important economic movements, the financialization and new instruments of credit that are appearing. So that's why I believe that it's so critical to understand also the role of South America in this moment, because literally is the crucial nascent moment of the United States financial system.
Mhm. Interesting. We've had a question from Kate where she shares our thoughts. Wonderful talk. Thank you. But she asks, in thinking about New England's interest and influence in international trade, were the merchants associations in places like Salem, Massachusetts, at all involved in this trade? As she says, I know their collections from Asia and the South Pacific form the basis for the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, but I'm curious how involved they were in South America, if at all.
Well, that's a great question. And actually, we normally tend to see just the last point, right? We think of like the China trade and we think just about China and Canton. We forget about, and I find it's very interesting because the very first American ship to go to China leaves from Philadelphia, the China Empress. That voyage did not produce profit. It was not profitable at all. They lost money. So but all the hundreds of voyages that came after were very profitable. So how do you make a voyage around the globe profitable? Not just with the final destination, but trading along the way. So these multilateral trade voyages were critical. And so the Salem merchants, the Providence merchants, as I said, like Edward Carrington, like this one of the biggest, largest firms involved in the China trade for over 40 years. They all are the guys who are sending the ships to stop either in Brazil, Rio de la Plata, Valparaiso. So it's very rare to find China trade voyages that do not stop in South America, being to pick up silver, being to pick up produce that would allow them into Canton. Chinese authorities did not allow traders to enter into Canton if they did not have some type of desirable produce. That's why many Americans would go on the sealing voyages, find like seal skins to introduce into China. So South America was a stopping point for Salem, for all the New England merchants. I found ships from Salem, from Boston, huge Mystic Seaport, and all those small New England port cities, all of them that appeared in China. Be sure that they also, most likely, most of them, I would say easily 70%, stop by in South America. Brazil here, I didn't talk much about stopping in Brazil, but also Brazil was a big stopping point. But Brazil was not rich in silver. Brazil also smuggled silver from Spanish Empire. So that's, but it was not as attractive as the Spanish ports. But absolutely, Salem is part of that as well.
And then you mentioned in your talk about how some would go on to California. Was that a small percentage, or would most kind of hit on to China or back up to London? Or
well, we see that some of them would go back to the United States or London, right? But the ones that crossed the Cape Horn and would go further to California, you start seeing these voyages becoming more common in the 1810s and the 1820s. And it's very interesting because not only they would effectively arrive in the West Coast fastest than going overland, so that was like a big route for trade on that, but we'll start seeing that some Brown and Ives would develop a system that they would leave some ships just navigating along the coast, the west coast of South America. They would move goods between Chile, Peru, in Mexico, in California. And when they realized, when they had enough capital, let's say silver accumulated, they would even ask, send letters asking, hey, what do you want me to do with your silver? Do you want me to send it back to the United States or send it to China? I have 15,000 here with me ready to go. Just let me know where it is. So it becomes very part of a system that enabled this trade with California, right, to be also profitable. But California and Nootka Sound destinations become more common towards the 1810s and 1820s.
Well, before we wrap up, Fabricio, your own personal career voyage journey, how did you wind up on the shores of Williamsburg? You mentioned that you've been here for a while, but tell us what brought you to the happy confines of William and Mary in Williamsburg.
Well, okay, I'm here originally from Brazil, right? And because I'm from southern Brazil, so I was like always close to the borders. So I've been like let's say a border crosser since I was little. I had family in the borders of Uruguay. That's why I was always fascinated by the history of the Spanish Empire, not only Portuguese Empire. And that's what brought me to the United States. So I came to do my PhD in the United States, and I was thinking, I'm gonna go back to South America quickly. But in the United States, I found something. For the first time, I was introduced to the type of history that allowed me to lose national borders. And that's Atlantic world history. The history of the North America, South America, Africa, and Europe interconnected. And that's why I think that William and Mary, my colleagues at the history department, eventually, I presented myself and they found, okay, you're a good fit. So, and I would say that the Atlantic currents brought me to William and Mary, and Atlantic circulations have kept me here happily.
Well, you're definitely a treasure within our arts and sciences faculty and the history department. So we're very fortunate to have you, and fortunate to have you with us tonight to learn much more. And it certainly whetted my appetite to read more about it, and because it's really a fascinating story of that era. So,
all right, wait for the book.
That's right, coming soon to bookstores. So we thank you, Fabricio. We thank all of you for joining us too, and stay tuned for future ones next spring. But we'll turn it back to our host Tim with any final remarks. First of all, Fabricio, any final words you'd like to say to
Thank you very much thank you everybody that is here. It's great to see names that are familiar, new names, and great to see some familiar faces. So thank you very much for this opportunity here, and thank you all for coming.
Appreciate it.
Great. Well, thanks, Fabricio, again. And for everyone who's on the line, we'll send a survey tomorrow. So please do fill that out. We'd love to get your feedback as well as input on our future events. So thanks again, Fabricio. Thank you all for joining, and have a great evening, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.